You brought up Ukraine, and it is somewhat unprecedented, this consensus around Ukraine that you see in places that, or I'm at least seeing in places where I usually find political agreement, even people who I agree with on other things. I find the world of people who see this as a proxy war, as opposed to seeing this as a Hitlerian march towards conquering the world, which we've actually seen that kind of ridiculous language. But I find that fewer people than I would think see it as a proxy war, and I feel like a lot of people I used to get along with and agree with politically are on that other side, where they see this as an unprovoked war, where they see this as reminiscent of World War II, and they don't want to stop the proxy war. Why do you think that is? Why is this an issue that is dividing people who sometimes or often see eye to eye?
Well, first of all, they're ignorant. And there's one way of curing ignorance, and that is to find out. And the wonderful thing today that somewhat counters the fact that we have such propaganda is that you can go through cyberspace and find real journalism. You can find real analysis, and you can find facts. It takes time, as we've discussed. I think one of the problems there, Katie, is that too often, and I think this is in the US more than anywhere, there is a kind of band of brothers and sisters, so-called, called the left. Well, there isn't. That's just not true. There are varying differences, radical differences, as there's always been. And for people to regard themselves as all belonging under one tent, so that they kind of have the same point of view and the same bigotry and the same ignorance, is slightly ridiculous. So I'm sure you're not worried about standing up to people like that from people who announce, and I'm always rather suspicious of people who keep declaring their political allegiance. Left, I'm left, you know, or John, I used to admire you.
Oh, yeah, that's another great one. What happened to you?
What happened to you? So, yeah, sure you did. But it's from the liberal, and that's a term that is so flexible, really elastic. But in the United States, it has a particular power. Perhaps it's called left liberal. And it's from that source that so many of our problems have come. That doesn't mean to say that commentators like you and me are turning into terrible reactionaries. It's ridiculous. We're not. Quite the opposite. But it means that the illusions created by liberalism, particularly American liberal. When I went to live and work in the US, well, I was then, most of my career has been in the UK, where I've worked for newspapers and television. I was sent to the US in my early 20s, not long after I first arrived in England. The power of liberalism struck me, the power of its hypocrisies, the power of its kind of declared ownership of certain issues, and yet the power of its inaction, of leaving things be or actually opposing things. That's the kind of thing when I certainly get the same thing as you, as people on the so-called left say to you, how can you possibly be like that? You know, we are both of left. Well, no, we're not. Left actually is a noble expression. It shouldn't be misused.
Right. Yeah. What I just find so surprising is that even after it's shown that the West has gotten in the way of peace when it comes to Ukraine, you still have people saying, well, yeah, but there shouldn't be a negotiation yet. There shouldn't be diplomacy because that just empowers Putin.
Well, why allow people to be killed? Look, okay, any invasion of a sovereign country is wrong. There's no question about that. And it's stated very clearly in the Nuremberg principles. But the difference between the invasion of Ukraine and the invasion of Iraq was that one was entirely unprovoked and the other one was entirely provoked. And that is a huge but. That but has to be understood, because if you don't understand that but, then you deny yourself background and context to something. You deny yourself an understanding. The idea that we should all go around approving something. I don't approve of the invasion of Ukraine, but I'm determined to understand it. And it doesn't seem all that difficult to me to understand, because I've watched it over the last 20, 30 years, head that way, head towards the western borders of Russia. There's no question about that. That was the aim, was to break up the Russian Federation. It was the aim in 1919, after the revolution, was to destroy the Soviet Union. The denial of history, the denial that the Red Army played the pivotal role in winning the Second World War, are all part of this. Now, you go much deeper when if we try to examine why do we have this thing about Russia? Well, it's multifaceted. It does have to do with a kind of, I suppose, economic, except Russia today is a capitalist country, pretty much. It's about, in many ways, it's about the other. It's about Eurasia. They're not quite us. They come from a different, many of them come from a different part of the planet, those strange people on the steppes that came down. Who are they? And it's also ridiculous, because they could be asking the same of us. You're speaking from an immigrant country, and so am I. And the same can be applied, I find, to China. The willful ignorance of China, of understanding the changes that have gone on to China. Just even saying that in sections of social media qualifies you to be called an apologist for the Chinese Communist Party. It's just absurd. I first went to China in the year after Mao died. I went a couple of times in the meantime, but then I saw it in all its extraordinary changes and growth about 7 or 8 years ago. And I couldn't believe my eyes. I couldn't believe what I was seeing and hearing. I couldn't believe, although I believed pretty quickly, the satisfaction of people with their lives and their country, whereas you and I live in societies where people are highly dissatisfied. And why was this so? These are questions. They're society questions, but they're political questions as well. But we don't even begin to ask in the media.
Right. One of the things I loved in your documentary, the Coming War in China, was when you interviewed someone who said, in America you can change parties but not policies, and in China you can change. You can't change the party, but you can change policies.
Exactly. I thought it was wonderful.
Yeah.
I agree with that.
Yeah, it's a great line. Yeah.
I thought that was extraordinary. That was from that was from himself. His name is Eric Lee. He he confused the hell out of people trying to understand China, because he's a stalwart member of the party. He's also a venture capitalist. He was educated in the United States.
Right.
He fuses both sides of the world, both the American world and the Chinese world, together into this fearsome intelligence and understanding of how the world is run. There's so much to find out in countries like China. I spent so much time there listening that I very much want to go back and listen some more. I'll make up my own mind later, perhaps, but it doesn't mean, of course, you have to keep throwing in this caveat, don't you? Which doesn't mean to say I approve.
Right.
I don't approve, or that I'm even making a judgment. But understanding is everything. And we have so much to learn from the Chinese about that. They take such a long view of everything that I think they're on their way, really. As long as we're not blown up by nuclear weapons in an ill-fated war, I think China is the greatest economic and technological and perhaps even cultural power will emerge. I don't think it'll dominate. I don't think it'll dominate at all. It's how the old world, the world of the British world, the American world, even the world down here, will come to terms with it. That's the question, how they come to terms with it. But benefit, in Australia here, the biggest trading customer is China. And yet they have led on behalf of the United States. I'm saying they, I suppose it's a we, have led the China bashing campaign. The China is coming, as if by the force of gravity, they're going to fall down on us. They're going to occupy us. They're going to take us over. Insulting China day after day. China withdrew all its contracts. The economy would just fall into the Pacific.